So I usually start these like I'm very confused, even though I'm not confused, because I think we're at episode 12 right now. And ladies and gentlemen, you guys are in for a special one. And I'm not just saying that, I know I say that a lot, but Alex Ottewell, ladies and gentlemen, he is the founder of OWP Capital Group. So he is in the oil business, but a little bit different than you guys think. He's definitely taken a different angle. So I know we think of these big, large oil tycoons out of Texas, and you're on your way to becoming one of those. So trying with a lot of different ideas about how to kind of tackle this business. Obviously, we'll talk about the conference where you made a massive splash and the reaction that you got from the industry. But we're going to take it a step back and talk about your real estate career, because that's really kind of how business began for you, more or less, right?
Definitely, yeah. So got out of high school, and being the son I was that didn't want to listen to my father, my first step, I went to boat mechanic school.
Okay.
A lot of people actually don't know that. I went to I think it was like a year program, Marine Mechanics Institute. Thought I was going to go work on yachts. I got out of high school. I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a trade under my belt. Spent about 3 months working at Marine Max in Clearwater. Fell off a boat because they were lifting it and cracked my knee. And that's how I got into real estate, because my dad at the time had kind of gone through, an up and down. I mean, this was around the crash time, right?
So we're talking like 06, 07?
No, it was a little later. So I graduated high school in 2009. In 2010, I'd finished up the program. So kind of going into 2011, I started kind of going to the auctions with him. So at the time, the market, nothing was selling, right? This was a real estate market where there was no hard money, but there's not a lot of cash in the market. So what was happening was he was going to these auctions, picking up these crackhead houses basically for 15, 20 grand. And he was like,
is this in the Tampa Bay area?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we bought, I bought houses in Spring Hill for 10 grand. 3-2 block houses.
And then you told me about that lot that you bought, and you had a lot of crazy opportunities.
We did a lot of deals. But basically, whenever I started going to the tax deed auction, I realized after about 6 months of basically being my dad's, I don't know, like I was painting, cleaning up the trash and stuff. He was paying me $10 an hour. I was like, you know what? I think I can get an investor on board and do this myself. And not thinking in the ways of like investor, like obviously my terminology is a lot better now, but I was like, who's got some money where I can go to the auction instead of having to kind of split things up with my dad and get an hourly wage. So I got a $40,000 investor to start, and kind of friend of the family kind of thing. And we started going together, right? So we would go at the same time. Dad would buy some, I'd buy some. We started dominating like Pasco County auction. As I was initially going, I didn't really have any kind of construction background, nothing like that. So all I was doing was buying a deal for 10 or 15 grand, taking the trash out, painting it, throwing it on Craigslist. It's literally what I was doing. And
so we're looking at back in the Craigslist days.
Yeah, it was Craigslist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Craigslist was a huge opportunity. When I was doing stuff with my dad, really initially, I was taking properties. Like I would take, I don't know, a lot or like an acre, 5 acres stuff, and trade it for cars, because during that time the cars were selling better than
than real estate. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was crazy. Like I had a lifted old 40s truck, 1970s Camaro, a couple of Harleys, all sorts of weird stuff we were trading. So as that progressed, I started saying, okay, we're doing enough properties where I'm buying at the auction cheap enough that I need maybe a crew, right? So I met this Hispanic guy, and he's like, hey, I got a bunch of friends, we need work. So I started off paying him like $80 a day, which is great, in retrospect now, but paid him $80 a day. And I was like, hey, do you have more friends? And we basically kept building crews from that, just by using a referral basis. Like, hey, I got one guy, I got another guy. Over the years, it scaled up to 4 in-house crews I was running. But and the skilled labor got better, right? Because I was not just painting them. We were actually doing real construction on them. Brought in some contractors.
So did you figure out how, like, what you were looking for? Like, did you figure out like what your kind of your prop? Yeah. Well, not even that. Just what your ideal project was. So it's like, okay, we're looking for 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses under X amount. We get in, we do this. We use the same materials. The crew knows what to do. So did you kind of figure out that I guess trailing model, for lack of better terms?
No. So oddly enough, bear in mind, I really kind of kept to my own area, right? I didn't really go to RIA meetings. I didn't have a coach. me and my dad kind of would relay information back and forth, but it was kind of a bootstrap operation where, you know, we were kind of bouncing ideas off of each other, but I wasn't networking outside of that. So it wasn't until later on in my career, probably 2017 time, that I actually started putting systems in place, because I met my mentor, Lee Carney. So he'd done over 8,000 transactions, and we became friends.
So you did this for 6 years and just kind of like bootstrapping it, just going through the motions before kind of like, okay, let's put pen to paper.
Yeah, we'd already done over 114 properties in 1 year at that point.
1 year.
With no systems. Yeah.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Well, and I mean, at that time too, because property was so cheap, I would imagine you could just kind of, you know, you could take chances. I mean,
yeah, it came down to the fact that my buy box was built around what other people didn't want to buy. So I've kind of applied that in every industry I've gotten into. I try and look and say, okay, well, if everybody's bidding on the 3-2 block home, why don't I bid on the other stuff? And so I'd pick up random vacant land and have it cleared, or I'd buy a double wide on an acre. This is before BlackRock and stuff started buying up mobile home parks. And everybody's like, why are you buying these double wides in Brooksville on an acre? Like, what the heck are you going to do with it? I'm like, we're going to sell it to a retail buyer, because a lot of people aren't aware that if you take a mobile home that's newer, 90s, let's say, and you go ahead and revamp it, put granite in, stuff like that, you make a home that kind of is very similar to an entry-level home in a block house, right? So the people that can't afford a $300,000 block house may want to pick up, a $250,000 double wide on an acre. It kind of fits that area where they don't have enough money for what they really want, but I can still make a quality product that was able to be, financed, FHA, conventional, whatever it may be. And then it scaled from there. I mean, it started off with literally just making 10, 15,000 a rip. And then, later on I was making 50, 60,000 per property. And, at my peak, I was running 20, 25 projects at a time.
No way.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it was intense. And I ran everything through Monday in the end, monday.com. That was, we basically created a template of what every property has, right? Like you were pointing to. I use the same paint, same carpet, same everything, right? It's always the same. We're just moving it to the next one. So once you have that kind of sequence, you can put together a SOP, a standard operating procedure of what's going to entail for each property. So every time we buy a new one, I create a new WhatsApp group, create a new Monday section, and it'd have a checkbox that my crew can literally just check off, drop pictures, and that was the way to automate it per se.
So let me unpack that real quick. So sure. You kind of did almost put together an SOP because, and for those of you that don't know, that's a system process. So basically you were using monday.com, and it's like you'd go into a property, call it a 2-bedroom, 1 bath, and, say, okay, it needs carpet, counters, some appliances, and, pick one other random thing, and some paint. And then they already knew what to do as far as, okay, all I need to do is measure this, throw in the carpet, need to measure this, put in the countertops, the paint is the same color and stuff like that. So you made it,
that was later
keep
on.
it simple. Okay, so that was later. Okay, so earlier on, you were were you more a little bit, picky, I guess, or kind of like hands-on?
So it was more of what was on sale at Lowe's. They used to have Oops paint.
Wow, okay.
So Oops paint was like heavily discounted, 75% off. So if they had 5-gallon drums, you'd buy 5 gallons of Oops paint.
Yeah.
It was definitely a different operation earlier on. After I met Lee, he kind of dove in like, hey, you got to get this organized. It's got to be processes here. It sped up my turn time, right? Because a lot of times when you're working on bigger projects,
time is money.
Yeah. And then when it became later on in the career, I started using hard money. So now I'm paying an interest every month. Instead of a profit share agreement that I had early on, then it became a monthly payment I got to pay. So that's where we got even more technical. We got to the point where we could do a complete renovation, 3-2, 1,500 square feet in 12 days.
So tell me about it, and I really want to deep dive into this because it's a struggle that I kind of come up with, and I have quite a few mentors, but sometimes I feel bad asking for help, and I think I'm going to figure it out myself, and so tell me about, or tell the audience about how important it is to find a mentor early on. Tell me about what that experience was like.
So I'll tell you, there's 2 sides to it. There's 2 arguments there, in my opinion. So what made me resourceful was the lack of mentoring I had, right? But a lot of people don't have that kind of determination where they are willing to try and test and kind of push forward. But I do believe that part of the fact that I didn't have, besides my father, I didn't have anybody to relay information with, made me more resourceful. I do genuinely believe mentors are incredible, and mentoring took me from a haphazard business that was making good money to a more refined business and kind of help me scale. I think there's a lot of, the problem with mentoring in this era is everybody wants to be a mentor more than
everybody's a coach.
Exactly. So I never
pay me $5,000 a month and I'll tell you what you're doing wrong.
Exactly. And it's a lot easier. I mean, the truth is 90, and Alex Hormozy talks about this all the time. 90% of the work is terrible. It's boring. It's horrible. It's monotonous. But we do it because we have that drive. There's some kind of inner drive with entrepreneurship. I also believe one of the problems in the last 3 or 4 years is everybody believes they should be a business owner when not everybody should be. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. You have to be able to be up against a wall, being pounded in the stomach as hard as you possibly can, and still want to push forward. And that's really what it takes. As dramatic as it sounds, and people hear it and they kind of roll their eyes at it or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, when everything's going wrong all at once, that's when you find out what you really are. That's the truth.
I think that's a great sentiment, and the willingness to carry on when times get tough. When maybe the bank account is at zero or you're losing money. When you have this person coming at you or that person coming at you, and that's where it's survival of the fittest at the end of the day.
100%.
I will say too, to your point. Gary Vee has been talking about that recently. We're name dropping on this episode, all the greats. But Gary Vee was talking about that and a little bit of content that I've seen over probably the past year. And it's like, it's okay to be a really great vice president or a really great number 2 or a really great chief operating officer. Like, that's okay. We've almost developed this culture in it, and I think it's, to your point, it's kind of taken us backward, where it's like, if you're not calling the shots, then you're not good enough. And it's like, no, maybe you're a really good number 2 or a really good number 3. Yeah. That's okay. And you look at the guys at Microsoft that were 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and onward, they did okay.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a thing I kind of learned in the last 4 or 5 years of my career. I mean, now we're at 13 years of, just over 13 years of self-employment. Earlier on in the career, I kind of wanted to do everything. And then it wasn't until later in my career where I realized, look, these are my strengths and those are my weaknesses. There's a cool activity that my mentor had me do early on where I listed off every single thing that I did in the day. And then I crossed out anything that didn't make me money. And then I also circled everything I hated. And all those things should be given to somebody else. And that's the truth.
That's massive. Yeah. That's massive. I've been getting that the last probably 2 years. I've been hearing that more and more in my own business. And they're like, I'm call Kevin. At the end of the day, I take every phone call and I try to be as available as possible. And sometimes that makes it difficult because I can't always get other work done. And the only way to scale is to be able to kind of, bring in other attorneys or hire other, support staff. And trust me when I tell you, if there's a significant issue, I'd be the first one to pick up the phone and let you know. But at the end of the day, that's the only way is, if you're really going to be a successful business owner, I think it's not only important to be able to delegate, but find rock stars that you can delegate to that can complement you well.
Yeah, 100%.
Don't just hire to hire.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people get kind of landlocked in that where they've been the guy that does the sales. They've been the guy that always answers the phone. And then when you want to go to another level, everybody still wants you. So you almost have to retrain your client base and say, hey, look, this is the expectation now. We did this before, but, hey, we're growing, we're building. I think a handoff can be done a lot of times of just having both people on a call and then the other person takes over, initially at least. Because the problem is your existing client base knows you, and then your new client base you have to set the expectation with. I mean, just in any business, not even just this. I see YouTubers all the time. They try and expand their YouTube channel, but when they pull themselves off, people don't recognize it because the brand's built around them, not actually the company itself.
Dave Ramsey had a massive fear about that. So you'll see all these the Ramsey personalities and however you feel about Dave. Regardless of that, he's getting up into, I think, 60s or 70s and kind of, I'm sure has his family and trying to do other things and stuff like that or wind down. And they were very concerned about, how is this legacy going to be carried on? So they tried out these different personalities and they've worked out great. And it'll be interesting for our generation to see kind of all these, mega personalities and influencers and YouTube personalities and stuff like that, how they carry on their legacy through other individuals. So we're at 2017 now. That's when you really start scaling. You get a mentor.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was probably, we were properly scaling in, 2014, 2015. I was running a lot. 2017, I started optimizing what I had. And then I actually pulled back on, how many deals we were flipping because I kind of learned more about wholesaling. So what we would do is generate a bunch of leads, kind of cherry pick what we wanted. And then other deals that we could take down, but maybe I didn't have enough crew availability at the time, I would wholesale those off. So I'd have the primary was fix and flip, but then I realized it was leaving money on the table because I had these leads. My other friends were interested. So I started doing some wholesaling on the side too. We kind of had like a second bucket to exit the assets.
When did you think wholesaling really, because that's interesting that you say that. Now you can't go on Instagram. If you scroll through your feed, you can't go without seeing somebody that's trying to sell you a course on wholesaling.
Yeah.
How dense was that, I guess, grouping back then? How popular was wholesaling in 17? I feel like it was not nearly as large.
So oddly, I know a bunch of the guys that kind of really kicked that off, the all-in guys, Carlos Reyes, he's a buddy of mine. Rafael Vargas, he was he was under Dolmar's brand, Dolmar Cross. He had Real Empire for that. My buddy Lee, who's my mentor, he actually was the CEO of the company briefly. So a lot of that wholesaling push came from people selling courses. Now, what happened, I believe, is you had the initial guys that were pushing the model. They were like, hey, this is great. You can make a lot of money. And then it gets diluted over time because the guys that go and learn about it spend about a year doing it. And they're like, wait, I can just sell a course. It's a lot easier. So they stopped doing the exercise. They didn't really go full, they didn't build a career out of it, right? They didn't have 10 years of experience with all the issues and problems. And instead now they're selling a course. Well, that next person is getting the diluted information from the initial guy. Well, now we've had 3 or 4 iterations of that. I mean, each year there's another iteration of people wanting to coach. So I think that's why we have so many issues with wholesaling now, because the morals of the initial guy gets diluted. And now we have legislative coming out to kind of stop that whole industry. And don't get me wrong, I think the problem is there's too many bad apples now. It's outweighed. I would say there's more people in wholesaling that are more willing to grab a buck than think about the fact that they're actually transacting somebody's home. The livelihood factor is something I used to get mad at people about because I would have these last minute calls from wholesalers, locked up the deal, held the contract all the way to the last second. And they were like, hey, we're closing in 2 days. The person's, the seller's got a U-Haul in the driveway. I need to get this thing bought. And I would just tell them, I'm like, look, I'll pick it up, but you're not making a penny because you were irresponsible with that person's livelihood. And, I kind of hold them accountable and give them a little slap. I don't think that's happening as much anymore in the industry. I think that most people are kind of just letting people get away with it, and then it's a compounding effect there.
What prompted your exit from the real estate industry or kind of slowing down and looking at other opportunities? Yeah,
I mean, I had another kind of jump. In 2020, I launched a call center for lead generation. So I was kind of doing lead generation.
Was that for the wholesaling?
Yeah, okay. For fix and flip too. I mean, we were mainly fix and flip, but I was getting over 2,000 leads a month. Which,
wow.
Yeah, so I got
holy cow. How many people were in your call center?
Oh, no, this is just for me.
Okay.
So I was getting 2,000 leads a month for me, 8 callers, and a guy that I was basically...
You were getting 2,000 leads a month from 8 people.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, because I targeted...
U.S. based?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, no. Filipino-based.
Okay.
U.S. calling. I mean, they were calling...
Yeah, of course.
11 counties around Florida, and I was hitting all the tertiary markets, the smaller mom and pop areas.
Yeah,
Nobody was cold calling.
Spring Hill, Brooksville, Zephyr Hill, State
Even
City.
higher.
Yeah.
Ocala.
Yeah, Ocala.
All the way up to like Putnam County. So we were getting really good results because nobody was cold calling them. And then the guy that was basically providing the callers, he was in the Philippines. He was in his early 20s. And he's like, hey, Alex, how come your account gets way more better results than mine? I've got, 30 other callers and they're not doing the same thing. So we ended up deciding to kind of like partner up in the sense where he would run the operations. I rebuilt the entire SOPs, all the scripting, everything else. And then I got Kevin Harrington to endorse it, and we blew it up really quick. So we had...
Great guy.
Yeah. So we had over 100 callers.
We're trying to get him on here, Kevin. We're friends of friends of friends, so we got to get you on here.
There you go. So we went over 100 callers on it, and within about 100 days. It was really, really fast. Because what happened was I had so much demand that we just went on a big hiring spree, right? And I already put the SOPs in place. When I build a company, I don't build it for small iterations. I say, okay, I want to have 1,000 callers. How do I build a system?
So you're looking at the end goal.
Correct. Always end goal first. If I have 1,000 callers, how would I manage them? I built the product basically behind that. I said, okay, we're going to need this type of quality control, this type of team management. We had 4 tiers: operations managers, team leads, data integrators, all sorts of different stuff. And I built it like that day one before we even had our first client. When it grew really quickly, that's what kind of led me to realize that I had more opportunity in other verticals, because those clients that were coming in weren't just about real estate. We had different guys wanting to do different things. So it started opening my eyes. I was like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be in real estate forever. In 22, I noticed, I was watching the interest rates. I was like, you know what? I think they're going to spike to 8%. I put a post out, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to practice what I preach. And I shut down my fix and flip mid 22. I literally woke up in Houston after a night of partying, and I said, I'm done. I'm not going to flip anymore. And I had over 20 projects still going. I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to find something else to do. So we ended up moving into JV wholesaling because I had a big database. I was using my buddy Robert Wensley's data program. I had over 4 million buyers. I was just slinging out deals for people. And I went down to Panama at a buddy of mine, Nick Perry's event, Panama the country. And it's called 8-Figure Cartel. It's a group of business owners that get together and kind of discuss their different industries. It's not just real estate. And a guy there was talking about oil. Sounded interesting. I ended up going out and spending a couple weeks with him, helping him build his systems.
This is in 22.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this was kind of Q3 of 22 or Q4 22. I went out there, spent 2 weeks with them, didn't really want to work together, came back. I'd helped him build out some stuff, came back, and I was like, you know what? Oil's pretty interesting. The JV stuff, it's okay, but it's just boring. I was like, I'm going to open an oil company. And I actually posted today on my story. Cause
I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, I texted my mom December 15th on the flight back. I was like, hey, just landed. I think I'm going to open an oil company. And then 3 weeks later, I opened an oil company.
So what intrigued you about the oil business? Because that's it's not an easy feat, man. No. I mean, and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things. So what was, was it just like this challenge, like this massive challenge because you had so much success in real estate that you're like, wow, I mean, where do you go from here,
Yeah, so I was like 31, I think. Was it 30? I'm 33 now, so I think it was 31. And I was like, you know what? I don't have any kids. I'm not married. I don't have any fiduciary responsibilities besides my mother, right? I help my mother out with stuff. And I was like, you know what? I can roll the dice now. If I wait any longer and I'm in my 40s and stuff, it's harder to go roll the dice on a brand new thing. And it's been a very roller coaster. I wouldn't want to do this with kids, honestly, because I feel like it kind of clamps you down, right? You have to be more responsible. But I definitely rolled the dice, and I believe, in what I can do. But it came to me. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to do it, now's the time. I hired a reservoir engineer who's kind of like the underwriter of deals. They look at what the reserve values are, and they kind of estimate what the production's doing, things like that. I hired one. I had him come into the office, and his very first day he walked in. He said, hey, what are we working on? I said, teach me oil and gas. There's a whiteboard. I spent 3 months sitting there with him, just learning the fundamentals, the ins and outs. And what I do is I try and find something that I already understand, right? Like fix and flip, I understand. And I apply those aspects over to oil and gas. That way my brain retains them easier. So if I can find similar verticals and similar things that interact together, it allows me to retain that information faster.
So you're just transitioning SOPs. You're not like trying to, rewrite the wheel or anything like that, or relearn the wheel, I guess, for lack of better terms.
I have a couple of things that bring to oil and gas.
Please.
So it's an old boys club. Everybody's been doing it for a long time, first generation or second generation. Most of these guys on the independent side, they're very successful, but they're not necessarily like marketers. They're not in that kind of realm, right? It's a very 20, 30 years ago industry when it comes to outreach and marketing and systems and stuff.
When's the last time you've ever heard of an oil influencer? You don't see anybody. I mean, other than you, when I first saw you talking about it, I was like, I never saw any of those guys. Yeah. I mean, it's a very quiet industry.
And it kind of needs to be in some sense. I'll tell you, I had a lot of friends like, hey, you're going to put a course together or something. And I never really was like a guru in real estate, but I definitely helped people at times and did some private mentoring and stuff. But the downfall with oil is that the barrier to entry is what stops new people coming into it. It costs millions of dollars just to get the operation really rolling before even buying big assets. There's a learning curve. Even the softwares are more expensive. The average software I've got is about $50,000 a year. And I've got multiple softwares.
It's massive. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a higher cost of entry and the staffing, like geologists, $200,000 to $300,000 a year, reservoir engineers, $150,000 to $300,000 a year. These people are quite expensive. So most people can't afford to take on that staffing for a period of time until they get a deal. Because you think about it, if you're trying to get everything built and staffed and software and everything else prior to having cash flow in, you're running negative cash flow. We ran negative cash flow for 18 months. And it's because we were trying to scale while we were trying to acquire. And it's kind of like commercial real estate where it takes 3, 6, 9 months. I mean, heck, there's some deals that take a couple of years to close. So you have that long cycle before you get a deal closed. And when I first started into it, I was like, okay, I'm going to start calling everybody. I'm going to speak to the operators. There's only about 10,000 independent active operators in the U.S. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go cold call them. So we cold called all of them. We hit them up and we're like, hey, we want to buy your stuff. And we'd make them some offers. My engineer would put together and be like, you know what? That sounds really good, but I don't know you. Have a good one.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
we were throwing out offers, 10, 15, $20 million just to see if we can get anybody to bite.
And they're like,
no.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah. They're like, you know what?
Appreciate you, but.
Yeah, that's exactly. Very polite people. You know, I mean, they're definitely real America. You know, I say that a lot because the difference between doing fix and flip is you're dealing with consumers on the buy side and you're dealing with consumers on the sell side. You know, it's a retail kind of guy. It's just regular people. In this, it's like these are real business professionals. That's the biggest difference between real estate and oil is everybody knows their industry. If they're operating and they have a successful operation, they know their business. Whereas real estate's kind of like, you know, you're dealing with some B2B, but mostly it's consumers, and it becomes more of a headache. I think that even though the oil guys are much more fierce, they definitely know what they're doing, and it's more, the conversations are far higher level, let's put it that way.
Go into more detail on that. And I know you kind of touched on it, but that was one of the big questions that I had, especially for the audience. Tell me about what it's like having a conversation or doing business with somebody that's, you know, well into, you know, the you know, call it 9-figure, you know, net worth club, even the, you know, the Billionaire Boys Club and stuff like that. Tell me how that interaction is so much different maybe than dealing with a real estate investor that's worth, you know, between 10 and 50 million.
You know, most of them are pretty humble. I'll give you a funny conversation.
Please.
We called up a guy and we were calling about one of his leases. So a lease has, you know, a collection of wells in it. When we called him, we really didn't look into his entire portfolio. So I'm kind of chopping it up with him on the phone. And he's like, yeah, I've got 9,000 wells. And I'm like, oh, we're only looking at like 20 or 30. So I'm looking up. So my engineer at the time is pulling up his production. He's like, holy crap, he's got a lot of production. And, you know, he's like, how are you guys getting your money? I'm like, well, you know, we raised some capital, but we also use leverage of bank. And he's like, oh, okay. He's like, well, that's my money. He's like, I spent 150 million last year. No bank money, my money. And it, you know, and he's just casually telling me this. And it just made me realize that what I thought was big money in real estate is just nothing in the scheme of things.
Not even scratching the surface in the oil world.
Not at all. When this guy can casually spend 150 million out of his checking, you know, with his $1 billion portfolio, and he's independent, he's not even publicly traded. I think a lot of the attacks that come into the oil and gas space is more about the majors and what they're up to. The independent guys, you know, they're just like everybody else. And though they have a ton of money, you know, you can go out to the field and I can meet guys with 100 million sitting in the bank and they'll still live in a single wide mobile home. You know, it's just their culture, right? It's how they were raised.
Do you think that the opportunity for you to grow this business will be a little bit different than real estate because I guess oil is not as like sexy. You know what I mean? Like it's like you see all these like real estate influencers and stuff like that, and you see all the, you know, oh, I do Section 8 and, you know, or I do wholesaling, and here's my Lambo, here's my Rolls Royce. You don't, even though these guys are the private jet club, you don't see that. Probably half these guys probably don't even have an Instagram or know what it is.
Well, the tipping part is when they get to that level of success, even the majors, right, even the big boys, they're all concerned with losing it. It's the fact is once you get that big, your liabilities are opening up.
It's not about winning anymore. It's about not losing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about protecting.
So the game's different. Okay.
Yeah. So for example, when you look at like the Marathon, Chevrons, people like that, they go so overkill when it comes to risk on site. Like they have 5 layers of risk mitigation with what they're doing because they're more concerned with getting sued than they are about producing. I mean, don't get me wrong, they love making money, but they're going to spend way more than everybody else to make sure that they're not getting sued by, a rig hand or something like that. I mean,
Of course.
they don't want to get in that situation. So it becomes more of a protecting. And I think they're all subject to a lot of lawsuits, so they try and keep everything a bit quiet. Whereas I'm opposite, right? That's where I've caused some controversy in the industry because I'm very outspoken. I'm trying to engage with the general public because I believe where the problem in oil and gas has occurred is you've got certain government people attacking the oil industry, and where the lack of knowledge is in place for the average Joe, they don't understand what's going on. People throw out terms like fracking and stuff, but most people couldn't even define fracking, right?
Couldn't even tell you.
But they just say it. And then when you have enough lobbyists pushing against it, the oil guys aren't pushing back. They're staying quiet. So you've got one party attacking it, and the other party's doing nothing. So that's where I actually want to get involved. I'm trying to push more education to consumers about what really goes on in oil, and we're building out a whole platform about this right now to kind of help consumers understand that, yeah, there is some, effects to the environment, right? But I even chat GPT this the other day. I said, hey, what would happen if all oil and gas production stopped in the U.S. tomorrow? And it literally wrote off basically the world ending.
Yeah, it's done.
People don't understand that. They connect oil and gas with EV. They say, okay, EV, yeah, EV is going to save the planet. Well, only 30 or 40% of a barrel of oil actually goes to, gasoline. So if you're removing that, you still have...
Goes towards making clothes, making roads, making,
Correct.
Food, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, even makeup. I mean,
Absolutely.
you'll see those people protesting it and they're wearing makeup that's petroleum based.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of ironic. But yeah, there's over 6,000 different product types that are made from oil. And then even on the natural gas side, like 40% of our electric grid is made up from natural gas. So on one hand, they'll complain about it. But the other hand, if pricing goes up, they'd be, even more upset. So they have to think about the root thing there. It's like, in life, sometimes you have minor sacrifices for long-term gains. I don't believe oil and gas will be around for 300-400 years, but I do believe in the next 100 years it's not going away because the demand's too strong. And, we're producing over 14 million barrels of oil a day. If you shut that off and you try and find an alternative, even on Tesla's side, we would need to increase our power grid like 50x in order to be able to supply enough power to run all those Teslas.
Talk about that more. So, and I don't know enough about it. So, I'll defer to your knowledge. How likely is, are we to see, electric vehicles taking over the majority of vehicles over the next, call it 25 years? I don't, between the cost and then the infrastructure needs, I don't see it happening for significantly longer or, a more outward period than that.
The problem is lithium batteries. Okay. So they're not as durable as they need to be. Mm-hmm. I'll say that
you get 5 years out of them.
Yeah, and it's not even just that. It's just there's environmental damaging there too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like lithium mining down in Chile and stuff. Yeah. What happens is the Teslas of the world, and I love Elon Musk. I'm not bashing him, but what they do is they'll buy their lithium from a third-party wholesaler, and that third-party wholesaler is acquiring it from the mines that are having the kids down there mining lithium. And they're blowing up, chunks of the earth and extracting this lithium. You got child labor issues, but it's kind of hands off. It's kind of similar to Apple, right? Apple doesn't actually remanufacture their phones. One of my buddies was a COO at Brightstar, and they had a contract with Apple where they buy all the phones, they'd ship them over to China, get the low-cost labor to do it, and then they sell them back to Apple. So Apple can say, hey, we're not involved in any, sweatshops. I mean, that's literally how they do it. They just third-party it off. Same thing occurs with lithium mining. Now, the dilemma is if right now the lithium batteries just won't hold up enough charge. They don't make life easy. I mean, you look at a Tesla, it says 350 miles, you get about 250. And then the cost for electric to power those things, you're having to create natural gas and things in order to be able to generate that, even coal. So I don't think it's an easy thing until we get a better source of battery. And I think the environmental damages going on with lithium and even wind turbines, I don't know if people realize, but Trump talked about this the other day with the whales. That's a real thing. There is wind turbines offshore that the noise is echoing through the water. I don't know if you ever have one of those speakers that you can put underwater and it kind of sonars out. Mm-hmm. Well, you think about it. sea creatures and things, they run off of sonar and whatnot. I mean,
echolocation and all that stuff. Yeah,
that's not my wheelhouse, but I understand how, generally how it works. But that's really creating those impacts. So even though, yes, wind power, okay, hey, it's making some wind, we're making some electric out of it, but the environmental damages are there because those things don't last long. You get 10, 15, 20 years, and then you got to put them in a ditch. They haven't found a way to actually recycle them yet. So there's like fields with just tons of wind turbines, and these things are huge. They're like,
they're massive,
20 stories.
Yeah.
And they're just laying out there in a field because we can't figure out how to recycle them. So yeah, it's sounding good on paper, but all these things aren't actual fixes. They're just creating other ways of producing energy, but not for long-term solutions.
Tell me how you're looking at your deals. So obviously we've talked about it in the past and you're bringing kind of a new view to it. So how are you looking at things different than most?
So you know how society has gotten to the point where, let's say back in the 50s, you had a pair of leather shoes and they broke. You would take them to a shoe guy. What do they call them?
Cobbler.
Cobbler, there you go. And
I got you. I'm the vocabulary king right now, so let's do this.
There you go. So he'd fix them. Now people just buy a new pair of shoes. Same thing occurs in oil and gas. A lot of people are focused on drilling new wells. And where we have a generational change in oil, majority of the operators are over 60. I mean, a very good amount of independent operators are over 60. And from what my surveying is, and people may argue with this, but I've talked to well over 1,500, 2,000 different operators at this point. Most of them don't have somebody to take over their company. So a lot of them are at the point where, okay, I'm in my late 60s. I want to retire. I want to get out of the business. But there's not enough people picking up this price point of production. To give you an example, if you're under $100 million company, you're kind of deemed mom and pop in the oil and gas world.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Under $100 million is kind of mom and pop. Now, there's a certain segment where capital likes to be. So a lot of banks and stuff will finance deals $25 million or above. So if you have deals that are under $25 million, it's typically a cash transaction. Now, I've found lucrative private oil and gas banks and stuff to help me fund things, but in general, $25 million is kind of the breaking point. So a lot of people look at production over that amount. So you got a lot of production that is smaller that may be worth 10 million, 12 million, 14 million. So unless you have other independent guys at that liquidity, they're not buying that production. So what's going to end up happening is either the production kind of fizzles out and closes, or it may get rolled up into a major, a big company acquiring them. Like right now, Marathon just got acquired by ConocoPhillips, which is pretty wild to think about. It was like 24, 26 billion, something like that.
Oh, it was a massive deal, yeah.
So all these people are kind of rolling back together. Now, back in the day, they wanted them all broken apart to avoid the monopoly effect, and now it's kind of going backwards. And the independent guys are getting out of the industry. There's very few people starting new oil companies. I don't know the actual statistic. I probably want to look this up now, but I would guesstimate there's less than 15 or 20 new operators coming into Texas every year.
I couldn't tell you. It would be a miracle if I could tell you one friend that works in the oil and gas industry, and it's probably just one.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, we're in Florida, right? So Texas is a different thing. Everybody kind of is in the industry.
That's normal.
It's the 8th largest economy in the world if it was a country. So it's definitely a big thing in Texas. But for me, I see the fact that the guys getting into oil have been around it for a long time, but there's no innovation coming in. We just started attacking AI and stuff that's starting to come into the industry. But even the softwares, they look like they're Windows 2000. They're really
so antiquated.
Very much so. And also the way of thinking too. So oil and gas guys only think about the oil production, but a lot of these different.
So you're saying there's a software play here. Interesting.
Definitely a software play. I'm not jumping down that realm, but what I'm looking for is I try and find assets that have multiple ways of making money, not just on the oil production. So I'll give you an example, and I did just lose this deal, so it's very unfortunate, but another company came in and knocked me out. But it was a deal in Utah that was producing 20,000 barrels of fresh water a day. So 1,200 parts per million, which is basically spring water. And the people in the area, and 20,000 barrels is equivalent to 800,000 gallons roughly. So you think about 800,000 gallons of water coming out of the ground a day. This water was just being flushed down the stream. And the farmers were kind of using it here and there, but it wasn't really being used. So I brought in my geologist. I said, hey, can we increase this water production? He's like, yeah, easily. Put some ESPs downhole, which are basically like bigger pumps. We can get up to 80,000 barrels a day, which is 3 million gallons a day. And then I was like, well, hold on a second.
That's quadruple. you originally said. Yeah. 4 times.
4x because basically it's a giant pump that just kind of pushes the water faster. So then I realized, I was like, hold on a second, I can sell this water. That's prior to asking about increasing it. But I was like, I can sell this water. It's good for agricultural. Utah, Idaho, places like that, they have massive water issues. They don't have enough water. So I kind of got bids at like 50 cents a barrel. You think about 80,000 barrels a day, it's $40,000 a day.
Yeah. Well, 1.2 million a month. Yeah.
Correct.
15 million a year.
There you go. So with that, the oil production was only making 130,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw it and I said, hold on a second, oil is cool, but there's way more money in the water. So that's the way I'm applying every one of our assets. Even though we have over 500 deals in our CRM that we could target, I'm trying to target assets that have multiple ways of revenue, but also we're trying to improve the existing production, because a lot of operators will kind of get to that lazy landlord point. You get like the slumlords that they're ripping the cash.
It's making me money.
Exactly. So we see optimization on existing wells. If a well's been producing for 30, 40 years and it's kind of stagnant, it's not declining massively, because over time wells decline. But you'll have certain formations that the pressures aren't there downhole. So if the formation has energy to push that, the gas basically to push everything up, you have pump jacks to pull it up too. But if it doesn't have enough energy down there's other ways of extracting and pulling it out at higher volumes, higher quantities. So these operators don't want to spend the money. So you can have a well that produces 2-3 barrels a day, and with some optimization, get it up to 20. So I'm not affecting the existing environment by buying these existing fields, basically taking something that was already producing for 30, 40 years, improving it, and re-injecting capital like it should, and also optimizing it. Think about this. I mean, farmers...
Very much like the fix and flip model. It's the oil version of,
Correct.
taking an asset that's been sitting there, putting in the paint, the countertops, the new carpet, and then, selling it to a different end user.
Yeah, and my goal is to roll up to $1 billion. So we're trying to build up to the point where we have enough cash flow to have $1 billion exit. Now, I may just exit the assets to that point and keep going, depending on how I'm feeling at the time. I will say it's definitely a business that you take a beating in. But, the goal is to improve the production. And instead of drilling, a lot of guys that have invested in oil and gas are like, oh, yeah, I participated in this drill. It didn't work out. I got my money back in 9 years and not 6 months like they told me. So what we're trying to do is we understand what this production is making. I also understand, hey, how much can I improve it? How much money I have to put into it? And how long can I get the money back? So instead of going into a deal where they're kind of gambling on the fact that the drill works, we already have cash flow day one. And we already understand what that cash flow is. So I may buy a deal at, let's say, a 40-month payout, meaning it takes 40 months to recoup the capital. If I can reduce that to 24 or 30, capital comes back faster. Now we have an asset that's worth a higher amount. I got some more.
Yeah, it's a win-win across the board, of course.
Correct. And then on top of that, a lot of people get into the drill part because they're like, okay, we get a huge tax write-off, right? Well, with PDP, which is what we buy, it's 15% depletion allowance per year. So if my investor on the deal makes $100,000 this year in cash flow, 15% of that is tax deductible, which is cool because it's kind of like depreciation on a apartment building or whatever. You can amortize that. Was it 28 and a half years? Mm-hmm. Same thing here, but it's 15%. It's a good amount of
massive. Yeah, that's huge.
Good chunk of tax savings. So that's what we've been trying to do. We're basically putting together a collection of assets, taking the independent guys and kind of bolting them all together. Now, I do want to keep independence. So part of my unique proposition when I go to these guys is, hey, we'll keep all your existing staff. Unless they're just, being silly, but we'll keep your existing staff. We're not a PE company. We're not going to shred out your staff and optimize that.
That's not how we're trying to save money. We're trying to make it better.
We're trying to make it better. We're trying to keep the existing teams in place and then keep that legacy going. So that's my unique, my USP is the fact that we buy the company, we don't strip it, we keep the name if they want it. We're not renaming the fields and stuff. People want legacy. And a lot of these guys that have 30, 40, $50 million in production, their kids don't want to take it over. They're like, that's a headache, Dad. I don't want to do that.
We're already rich. Yeah.
The worst one I've ever had, this guy told me that he called his daughter and she said, Dad, the day you die, we'll have the funeral at noon and the auction at 1.
So sad.
It's very sad.
Yeah, after this guy's probably, and these are multi-generational families a lot of times too,
Yeah.
and this guy's probably been doing this since he was old enough to walk. So tell me about what it's like. Obviously you're raising money for this Tell me how that's been like. What
Awful.
What is awful? Yeah. Tell me what's that like to raise money up for a new endeavor.
So the dilemma I have is, and I kind of want to, before we dive into that,
Please.
we didn't circle back to the fact that when I was calling all those people, they didn't want to talk to us. The reason we're able to talk to them now is I decided to be the main sponsor of the largest oil event in the country. So NAPE Expo is a massive thing, 10,000 attendees. I had Marathon on one side, BP on the other, Occidental, they're a $190 billion company, and we had the main booth dead center. That attracted a lot of attention. We went viral on Twitter because somebody knocked us and they were like, who's this idiot, real estate guy? We got called a Ponzi scheme, all sorts of stuff. When people don't understand what you're doing, they're fearful, right? I mean, nobody comes into the industry.
He comes in beating his chest. Yep.
I did.
Nonsense.
Yeah. I had a 2-story booth, looked like an MMA fighter ring, brought a bunch of girls, pass out stuff, gave away a $20,000 Hublot. We wanted attention, right? And it brought a lot of attention. I had calls from all over the world after that. India, South Korea, Chinese companies. We had, I even had a guy in Oklahoma call me up and he's like, hey, we run blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Probably a $300 million company. He's like, how does it feel to be the most talked about person in oil? I'm like, no pressure there. Because we had 2.5 million views on that.
I was going to say, how did that feel? I mean, you went from, it wasn't, I want to call it an overnight success, but it was like you were the new, the new guy in town. You were the guy with the hit single,
Correct. And that kind of attention was good and bad. So I'll say that,
did you think you were going to get that type of attention before you did it? Not
to the extreme we did.
Really? So was that significant?
Yeah, it was intense. I had like executives at Marathon coming up to me saying, hey, our boss came over it said to go talk to you, right? And I'm still friends with a lot of those guys. Yeah. But like it was to the point where, and the dilemma was people made their own opinion, right? They assumed, are they a $1 billion company? Or, we had a guy say we were George Soros backed because my actual petroleum company's name is One World Petroleum. Mm-hmm. OWP Capital Group is abbreviation, but they were like, oh, are you George Soros backed? I mean, people had all these rumors starting. It was pretty wild. That was kind of more than I expected, but it was good because I do believe that we are going to change how oil and gas is looked at because the oil companies do well on extraction. Don't get me wrong, we're buying deals and stuff, but I think I can re-educate the average consumer in America. That's where I'm pushing towards because I'm such a marketer and what I do. I believe we're going to be able to kind of readjust that. And I've met the governor, Governor Abbott, Texas. I met Governor Stitt, Oklahoma, and I plan to try and get them on board with the educational play of not necessarily kind of money. I'm not selling a course. I'm trying to educate the average consumer in a way that they understand. Think of like TikTok and stuff. I mean, people absorb that kind of information because it's given to them in the way they understand it. So I'm kind of applying those same metrics to help people understand what's going on in oil. This is a question that, and it might be multifaceted for you, but I ask on every podcast, when did you feel success throughout these, I guess, 13 years of being self-employed? Meaning, when did things feel different? Like, wow, I'm doing something. It could be in real estate. It could be in oil. Was there a certain point where you felt a little different? No, oddly enough, part of my driving force is my own negative belief on myself. Real? Okay. I'm very hard on myself. And that's very common with successful people is that, they're their biggest critics. Yeah. I mean, at one point I had like $800,000 of the cars. I could see you selling for $1 billion and going, man, I could have sold for 2. Maybe. Yeah. So at one point, we'll figure it out. Yeah. At one point I had $800,000 in cars. I was doing any dinner I wanted. We did private jets and stuff like that, fun stuff. And, I'd still wake up every day and say, you could have done more. And I'd beat myself up about it. But I think that's when you're self-employed, you don't really have a driving force behind you. Yeah, you can have mentors and stuff, but your inner voice is what pushes you the hardest. My problem is I refuse to fail. And I believe that people don't fail in life, they give up. And I know a lot of people talk about that now, but I truly believe it. If you give up, that's the point you fail. Because if you keep grinding, keep pushing, that's what's going to take you to another level. I'm not saying go out and start an oil company, right? But or even start a business at all. But you fail when you give up. You don't fail when you just make mistakes or have negative effects come out, right? We've had a lot of problems, and I haven't failed from that. I've just kept pushing. I will tell you, I finally, one of the biggest goals that I had through practicing was joining what's called the $1 Million Advocate Club. And it's a group that they have, and they, people will say what they want about it, as far as, oh, you pay for this plaque and stuff like that, whatever. But
basically it's if you've settled a case or gotten a verdict for over $1 million. And the first time I did it was actually last year. And my first thought was, I can't wait until I can get the multi-million-dollar advocate. It didn't even, it hit. I was excited for the client. Obviously, it was a great day. But at the end of the day, I was like, what's that next goal? What's that next milestone? So do you have, and I think I've gotten a little bit better with it and definitely asked people on the podcast, do you have times where you kind of give yourself a little bit of grace, or is it just still, pedal to the metal?
It depends. It depends on what I don't know.
Situational?
Yeah, because okay, even when I was flipping houses, right? When you make your first 10 grand profit, 20 grand profit, it's like, wow, lasts like a week. Then you make another one and it's lasts like a day. And then you're making 100 grand profit and it lasts 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So it becomes, people think that money is the motivator. It's only the motivator when you can't afford your bills. After you get to the point where you got money in the bank and you're doing things, money can motivate you to an extent, but what pushes you past that is passion. I said, people watch these and they're like, oh, it's so cliche, but it's the truth. I could have made a good amount of money in real estate continuing for the next 10 or 20 years without a lot of effort. But my passion for growth and changing things and doing things differently is what brought me into oil. I didn't do this because I thought it would be an easy feat. It's not easy. I mean, it's a very difficult challenge. And when it comes to raising capital, because we've had so much controversy going on between wars and elections and things like that, it's created a lot of fear in the average accredited investor. Don't get me wrong, the big boys are still lending. They're still giving 20, 30, 50, $100 million. They don't care.
It's nothing to them.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's part of the balance sheet.
But the accredited investors that you typically have in funds like we have, they are nervous about what's going on in the country. So it's not just been about convincing them or showing them what we do. It's also been about the fact that they're concerned with the overall world. So that's what's been a bit more difficult for us, but we're still making it happen. I'm just getting more creative on what we're doing, right? And also the fact that I got featured in Nate Magazine, which is a quarterly magazine. Yeah. They feature me as CEO. And as you know, a lot of things are paid. This was not paid. You cannot pay your way in. Oil and gas isn't an industry you can run ads and stuff, but having a full feature like this, they called me up and they were like, hey, we're featuring you. Prior features have been Occidental's CEO. They've had Harold Hammond there, who was he's the 100th richest person in the world. He was part of the reinventor of how fracking was done and stuff. So, these big boys have been in there and they featured me, but they did it because they said that I'm becoming the new face of oil and gas to the community. I'm young, I'm 33. I've got a long history to head, and they know that all the people leaving the industry are going to need somebody else to kind of be the face of it. So I'm not right now. I'm definitely growing and building, but I believe in my marketing abilities will become the new face of independent oil and gas.
One thing that I really want to capitalize on is you were talking about passion, and it does sound cliche, but I'm going to evolve on that point. I think when so many of these guys out there that you see on, and I know I harp on in my podcast, the fakeness or the nonsense that goes on social media and Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that, and the flexing and the flex culture and stuff. If you can't go and ask yourself when you wake up every day, why am I doing this? And can't give a different reason than, and I get paying bills and stuff like that. Yeah. But in our situation, we could do a lot of things to make money. If you can't come up with a different purpose than I'm trying to make a lot of money, I think you really need to reevaluate what you have going on.
I agree.
I think you really need to evaluate what you have going on, and I think you need to do some reflection. Because at the end of the day, life is too short, and the Rolexes and the cars and the dinners and all that stuff is amazing. It's a lot of fun. We've all done it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, you're still going to feel empty inside, and you're still going to be going and doing something that you don't like or doing because you have to do it for the wrong reason.
Ego ruins businesses, I believe, and I've learned over the years to always admit when I'm out of my depth, and I'm already out of my depth as it is, being a new oil company over the last couple of years. I definitely have a great understanding, but it's already something pretty big. Why take it to another level and risk?
No need to stack the deck any higher.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're going to be. But it'll be exciting. We're the main sponsor again in February, same spot, because I wanted to keep my spot. Mm-hmm. So we'll have that big event again, and I'm hoping we'll have this asset acquired by then, because it'll be our biggest purchase yet. So
That's fantastic. Congratulations on that in advance. I'm going to go ahead and share all of Alex's contact information, his IG, the website for One World Petroleum, so you guys can learn more about that if you guys are interested, if you're an accredited investor. Yeah. Not pitching anything or anything like that. I don't know the rules on that, but listen, if you want to know about oil, make sure you hit up Alex and his group.
Yeah, we put together actually a website. So One World Petroleum is just our landing page for the company, but investinpetroleum.com is actually where we have all the information about investors can get involved. It's an accredited investor thing only, 506C Reg D, so they have to meet the SEC requirements of being an accredited investor, but investinpetroleum.com.
There's no doubt in my mind that Alex is as successful as he is based on everything that he's told us today. So thank you, my friend, for coming on. Wish you the best of luck. And I can't wait to have you on in a little while to talk about that massive acquisition and then maybe a couple years down the road in the Billionaires Boy Club. All right. Or Boys Club. All right. All right, guys, like and subscribe. My producer's going to yell at me. Make sure you like and subscribe. I appreciate you. We'll see you soon. Be good. Later, guys.
Cool.